Hey guys, welcome to Fatal. I'm your host, Beth McCarty. You are about to hear episode 4, which is part 2 of the Diane Downs case. I just want to thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate your support. And I wanted to remind you that I have a Facebook group, which can be found on our new Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/fatalpodcast. I actually had a Facebook group previously, but I was having problems linking the group to the new page over the weekend. So the previous group had to be deleted and I had to start a new one. So if you were a member, please look for us again and join. I apologize for the inconvenience. I wanted to give a special shout out to the True Crime Podcast group as well. I've gotten so much help and feedback from you guys. You're all rock stars. Oh, and follow me on Twitter at Fatal Podcast. Stay tuned to the end of the show today for updates on the Fatal Swag contest. Okay, so last week we discussed Diane Downs and the murder of her daughter Cheryl, who was 7, and the attempted murder of her other 2 children, Danny, who was 3, and Christy, who was 8 at the time. After waiting for what seemed like a lifetime, gathering evidence and waiting for Christy to heal enough to be able to speak in court, Diane was finally arrested. We stopped right before her trial was going to take place, and today we'll actually start off there. Just wanted to give another shout out to my husband Bucky, mixer of the Fatal music and owner of my heart. He's going to be a guest on today's show later. Alright, now on to the episode. On Thursday, May 10th, the jury filed into the courtroom. 9 of the jurors were women, and there were 3 alternate jurors. Most of the jurors were married and also parents, and many of them lived in the country, and at least 8 kept pistols, rifles, or shotguns in the home for protection. The jury would not be sequestered. Lane County could not afford to put them up in a hotel and furnish all their meals for the next 2 months. They were instructed to avoid newspapers, television, and the radio. The trial began with opening statements. Fred Hughey had spent more time organizing and preparing his opening statement than anything else. He wanted to put the entire case in perspective so that the jury would know what to expect, and when the proof substantiated his opening remarks, they would have no option but to come back with a verdict of guilty. He explained the motive, lust for a married man who did not want children. The method, the .22 Ruger that the killer had brought with her from Arizona. The opportunity, so easy. Children are safe and drowsy in their own mother's car, believing they were headed home to get into bed. He described how Diane wanted to marry Lou, and how the only obstacles she saw to him leaving his wife to be with her were her own children. Hughey read letters that Diane had written to Lou, painting a huge picture of her obsession over him. When it was Jim Jagger's turn for opening statements, he explained that there were only 3 key portions to this case: Christy Downs, ballistics testimony, and crime lab evidence, and of course, Diane herself. Jagger went on. Yes, there were levers. No one was denying that, he said. Yes, there had been an obsession with a man, but never to the exclusion of Diane's children or her career. Jagger told the jury that Diane learned to hide her real emotions because she was molested by her father when she was a child. That they must not judge her by the way she acts in court. He went on to say that she does not react typically to pain. She laughs, she jokes, and this is her habitual action. He explained that there would be times that they may hear her on tape and that they would see that she talks without thinking. Each side, both the prosecution and the defense, felt that the more the jury knew about Diane, the better their case was going to be. On Monday, May 14th, Judge Foote, the jury, and Dianne boarded a yellow school bus. They were driven to Old Mohawk Road. The jurors all piled in and took the drive. When they got out, they looked at the river, the trees, and the narrow roadway that looked so normal now. This was actually the same week that the incident had occurred, except 1 year later. They also traveled to the Lane County Public Workshop, and the jurors were able to look at the shiny red Nissan Pulsar, where it had been parked for a year now. Heather Plourde was the first witness to take the stand. She had said that it was about dark when Dianne pulled up in her driveway, and that Dianne had told her that they were out sightseeing. Heather's neighbor also testified about when she had heard the car door slam and the sound of tires leaving Heather's driveway. It was 20 minutes to 10. This early testimony was important in the matters of establishing a timeline. Joseph Edmund was next. He described about the time that he had come up behind the red car with the Arizona license plate and how the car was barely creeping along on Old Mohawk Road. A huge map was brought in, and it had an overview of the vital areas in the case. So it showed Diane's duplex on Q Street, Heather's mobile home on Sunderman Road, the spot where the .22 casings were found on Old Mohawk Road, the point where Joe Edmund said he observed Diane's car inching along the road, and the hospital. The shooting had to have occurred at 5 minutes to 10. It was 10:15 when Joe Edmund first observed Diane's car. He followed her for 0.2 of a mile at a speed of 6 miles per hour. And it was 10:17 when he reached a straight spot in the road where he could pass by her. Dianne was 4.5 miles from the hospital at this point, and yet it took her 22 minutes longer to reach the emergency room. Jagger tried to actually get Edmund to sway on his recall of the time and speed, but Joe Edmund did not waver. He stuck with his testimony. Next up were the hospital employees. They testified on the condition of the children and the demeanor of Dianne. One after another, the employees took the stand, and they shared the weird comments that Dianne had made, and how she seemed to be worried about her car, and how she had even laughed at one point, and said, well, at least I have good insurance. She never cried, and she never lost control of herself. The doctors who worked on the children spoke next. They talked about all of the extreme measures they had to take to save Diane's 2 remaining children. And it was mentioned how Dianne thought that Christy was going to have brain damage, so she asked them not to sustain her life. And at that time, there hadn't even been any testing done to see if there was going to be any brain damage. The defense had planned methodically to put Christy on the stand between 2 doctors, Dr. Becker first, and then Carl Peterson. That way each could kind of explain why Christy expresses herself the way that she does. And Christy's entire foster family was in the court to support her. After lunch break in court, a door beside Judge Foote's bench opened, and a little girl walked in. She was looking at the floor, and she slowly lifted her gaze. Christy and Diane's eyes met, and they stared at each other for a moment, and then they both started to cry. Dianne looked away first, and Christy dabbed at her face. She had this little pink lacy handkerchief with her, and Christy's right arm hung limply at her side. Now the next part may seem a bit long, but I wanted to read her testimony as I have it word for word. This is also the part where my husband comes in. He is actually going to be reading the parts of Fred Hughie, and I will read the parts of Christy's testimony. Okay, here we go.
Christy, do you feel okay?
Witness nods head.
You're going to have to talk to all these people here. Can you tell me your name?
Diane Downs.
How old are you?
9.
And what grade are you in?
4th.
Do you know your teacher's name?
Yes.
Can you tell us her name?
Miss Botteriff.
Did you go to school today?
No. Christy's voice is trembling and high. You can tell she's trying so hard.
You had to come to the courthouse?
Yes. Christy's face is very red.
We've talked about this day before, haven't we? That this day would happen. We have talked about it?
Yeah.
Okay, Christy. Do you remember back to the day when you got shot? Can you remember?
Yes.
Do you remember if you went to school that day or not?
Yes, I did.
Do you remember where you went when you came home from school?
Yeah. Judge Foote interrupted Hughie's questioning to remind him to inquire as to Christy's competency.
Yes. I haven't lost sight of that.
Very well, said the judge.
The judge wants me to ask you some questions about if you understand the difference between the truth and a lie. Do you understand the difference?
Yeah.
If I said this piece of paper was black, would that be the truth or a lie?
A lie.
And you know that when you come into the courtroom like this, that you have to tell the truth. You understand that?
Yeah.
Do you promise to do that?
Uh-huh.
Do you promise to do that?
Yeah.
So everything we talk about in here now has to be the truth as best you can remember. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
On the day this happens, you went to school and you came home from school. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Whose house did you go to?
My grandparents?
Did you eat there?
Yes.
After you ate, where did you go then?
To my mom's house?
Back to her apartment, where you were living?
Christy nodded.
Did you go out that night?
Yeah.
Did you go for a ride?
Yeah.
Who went with you?
My mom, Cheryl, and Danny went.
And do you remember the car?
Yeah.
What color was the car?
Black and red.
Can you tell us where you went? Do you remember where you went to?
Yeah.
Where?
My mom's friend's house.
And was that in the city or was it in the country? Were the buildings tall buildings or was there a lot of grass?
A lot of grass.
Do you remember what you did when you got there?
Yeah.
What did you do?
We went out and petted the horse.
Did you give the horse food?
Yeah.
What was your mom doing when you were petting the horse and giving it food?
She was talking to her friend.
Do you remember her friend's name?
Yeah. Heather.
When you left Heather's, do you remember if it was light or dark?
It was dark.
Who was in the car when you left Heather's house?
My mom, Cheryl, and Danny, and me too.
Do you remember if there was any music playing in the car?
Yeah.
Was it from the radio or was it from the tape?
Tape.
And do you remember there was a time when the car stopped?
Yeah. Christy began to cry again. Hughie paused, and Christy took a deep breath.
When the car stopped, did you see any other people around?
No.
Did you see any person standing in the road?
No.
When the car stopped, what did your mom do?
There was no sound at all in the packed courtroom. Nothing beyond Fred Hughie's soft questions and the witnesses' tear-choked answers. No breathing and seemingly no heartbeats from the jury or the gallery. She got out and she pulled the lever that went to the trunk.
I'm going to show you a picture here. It's called States number 335. Is that the lever you're talking about?
Yes.
After your mom pushed the lever that went out to the trunk, were you able to see her do anything after that?
I didn't look at the back.
Okay. Did you see her come back into the car?
Yeah.
What did you see then?
She kneeled down and Christy began to sob, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs were echoed in the courtroom as spectators broke into tears too. Diane turned her head away from Christy.
Would you like a recess?
Christy didn't say anything.
What did you see? You told us she leaned across the seat.
Yeah.
What happened then?
Diane was crying. Christy put her hand to her face as if to block out the memory. She shot Cheryl.
And you saw that happen?
Yeah.
Was the music still playing?
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that was?
Christy did not answer. Her face was scarlet with the effort to stop the tears and keep going. But she couldn't say the title of the song that was playing on the car's tape.
Maybe I'll come back to that. Do you remember what happened after you saw Cheryl get shot?
Yeah.
What happened then?
She leaned over to the back seat and she shot Danny.
What happened then? What happened after Danny got shot?
She standed up and she went to the back of the seat on the... Christy could no longer hold back her tears. In the gallery, her foster sister Brenda let out a wail of anguish, and Evelyn Slavin cuddled her, tightly rocking her. Brenda could not handle Christy's testimony. The Slavins' son carried her out of the courtroom. Christy was not alone. She had Mr. Hughie, and Mr. Hughie was trying to help her finish what she must say.
Do you remember when you got shot?
Yeah. Her voice was thick, clouded with tears, and she held her pink handkerchief to her face.
Who shot you?
My mom.
Do you remember the music that was playing?
Christy was silent.
Can you not think of it right now?
I can't think of it.
Do you remember what happened after you got shot?
No.
I'm going to put before you States number 334. Have you seen that before?
Hughie picked up the golden statue from the bailiff's bench and held it out towards Christy. Yeah.
What is that?
It's a unicorn.
Where did it come from?
My mom bought it for us.
That was before you got shot?
Yeah.
If I said the name of that song that was playing, do you think you could remember it?
Yeah.
Is it Hungry Like the Wolf?
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
No.
Christy, has anyone ever told you to lie about this?
No.
What you've said here is the truth?
Yeah.
Christy, do you still love your mom?
Yeah. Fred Hughie was finished questioning Christy. He offered the two exhibits that were identified by Christy, the unicorn statue and the picture of the trunk lever. Now it was time for Jim Jagger to cross-examine Christy. Jagger started slowly enough, asking basic questions like if she knew who he was, which she didn't. Once he started questioning her about the night of the shooting, he seemed to be trying to make her slip up. And after he conferred with Diane, it seemed that they thought she might be confusing the night of the shooting with the trip to the beach that they had taken. Jagger seemed to ask the same questions over and over again, and he was taking too long questioning Christy. She had gotten to the point where if she didn't know how to answer him, She would just stay silent. Jagger tried to get the judge to recess for the day, and that's exactly what Hughie had been afraid of. Christy was terrified of being on the witness stand. He didn't want her to have to go through another night of anxiety, and Judge Foote agreed. He ordered only a 10-minute recess. After the recess, Jagger picked up right where he had left things. He was asking the same questions again, and ultimately just confusing Christy. He finally finished with his questioning. He hadn't gotten any new information from Christy, really. Fred Hughie wanted to let Christy go now, but he couldn't. He had to ask her more questions on redirect. So Fred started.
Do you know who shot Cheryl?
Yeah,
Who was that?
my mom.
How do you know that?
I watched.
Were there any strangers there? Anybody that you didn't know?
No,
How about with Danny? Was there a stranger there when Danny was shot?
no,
Who shot him?
my mom.
How about you? When you got shot, were there any strangers there?
No,
Who shot you?
my mom.
Do you know that because you saw her do it?
Yeah,
Was she close to you when it happened?
not close.
In the same car. Was she in the same car or standing outside?
Christy didn't respond.
Do you remember when the shooting happened? Do you remember when Cheryl got shot?
Yeah,
Was your mom inside the car then?
no response.
Was part of her outside the car and part inside the car?
Still no response.
Are you pretty tired now?
Christy didn't respond.
I don't have any other questions.
Jim Jagger didn't either, so Christy was free to step down. She had done it. Carl Peterson took the stand next. He talked about the progress he had made with Christy, and how listening to the Duran Duran tape had brought back memories. She was scared to talk to him about it, though. He described how she would write the name of the person who shot them on slips of paper, and then seal them in an envelope, and then throw them into the fire. Until one day, on December 19th, she wrote the name on the slips of paper. She sealed them in the envelope, but she didn't throw them in the fire this time. She told him that he could save them if he promised not to open them until she said it was okay. After a counseling session on January 16th, Peterson asked Christy if she feared she might be shot again. Christy thought about it for a long time and then said, maybe, if I lived with her again, but maybe she wouldn't. Christy had finally confided that she didn't want to live with her mom again. Maybe she didn't really love the family, Christy said. She just loved Lou. On redirect, Fred Hughie handed the still sealed envelopes to Peterson. Christy had given permission to open them. He opened the envelope dated January 2nd and read what it said as instructed. Who shot Cheryl? The answer written here is Mom. Would you open the envelope dated December 19th? Peterson opened it and read, Who shot Christy? The answer is the same. It's Mom. The doctor who performed Cheryl's autopsy testified next. He explained that the cause of death was 2 gunshot wounds through the upper body through the aorta. She bled to death. The jury became noticeably affected by his testimony. And next up were all of the police officers who were involved in the investigation. One by one, they told of their contact with Diane Downs. The best piece of physical evidence that the state had was the identical match between the extractor marks on the casings from the death bullets and those of the 2 bullets in the .22 rifle. The children's blood-stained clothing was also shown as evidence. Steve Downs took the stand, and Hughie asked him about his relationship with Dianne, which Steve described as good, and then iffy, and then bearable, and then bad. He was aware of his wife's lovers, and he also admitted to a few incidents of domestic abuse towards her as well. Steve was asked if he ever showed Dianne how to operate the .22 Ruger, and Steve said that he had. On May 21st, the courtroom was transformed. The mock-up of Dianne's car was brought in, the roof was off and placed to the side, and this car was pale blue, not red. They wanted to make it so the pools of blood would show up better. The dolls were also brought into the courtroom. Not nearly realistic as the car. They were just big white rag dolls, really. But they were made to be the exact same size of the Downs children on May 19th, 1983. They used the dolls to show where the bullet wounds were, and they had used dowel rods to show the bullet paths through the dolls. As they were demonstrating how the shooting went down, using the car and the dolls, the judge invited the jurors to stand up so they could get a better view. Dianne looked away during this part. Now, Christie's testimony came into play here because she had testified that the music was playing throughout the entire shooting of all three children. Upon inspection of the tape player, Jim Pex had found the tape player wouldn't operate unless the keys were in the ignition and the car was on, or at least turned to on. Dianne had said repeatedly that she had her keys in her hand, and that she had turned the car off, grabbed her keys, and then gotten out of the car, and that she had faked throwing those keys to distract the supposed stranger that had shot her children. If the keys were in her hand, outside the car, how could Christie have still heard Hungry Like the Wolf playing? Pex's findings suggest that Dianne lied about throwing the keys. It made her entire story about fighting the gunman off suspect. Hopefully the jury could pick up on the significance of that. There were several hours of testimony regarding blood spatter and differentiating between blood spatter and cast-off blood. The song Hungry Like the Wolf by Duran Duran was played in the courtroom. And while it was playing, Dianne jiggled her foot in time with the music. She snapped her fingers and mouthed along with the words of the song. I mean, how could this song not bring back, terrifying thoughts? Lou Lewiston was called to testify, and he spoke of his affair with Dianne, and how he had lied to his wife to continue the affair, and how it stopped and restarted on more than one occasion. He also testified about the rose tattoo that Dianne had gotten with his name under it, and how after he had had a few drinks in him, Dianne was able to talk him into getting a rose tattoo as well. He said that he refused to get Dianne's name tattooed on him, though. He was asked if there was a name tattooed there now, and he said there was. Sweet Nora. Dianne was visibly upset by this, not so much hurt as pissed. Lou told of all the letters that she had sent him, and also hand deliveries to him, how he had stopped taking her calls, and he refused mail from her after she moved to Oregon. He also told of the phone calls that she had made to him after the children were shot, and how she talked to him as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Lou was on the stand for nearly an entire day, recalling the troubles in the relationship. He was also asked about the .22 Ruger, and he said that he had seen it in the trunk of her car the day before she left for Oregon. The tapes were played then. There were 25 tapes, and some of them were over 2 hours long. The state had called 33 witnesses. 428 items of evidence had been logged. And on the last day of May 1984, Fred Hughie was arrested on behalf of the prosecution. Jagger called Diane Downs to the stand. The moment he put her on the stand, it would open up the door to questions from Fred Hughie, and Diane didn't even care. She said she had to explain her side. She was asked how she felt, and she said she was scared. She was glad to finally be there. It had been a long wait. She was scared and anxious to finally have a chance to say what really happened. She was also asked what control means to her, and she said that control was not showing emotion. You don't show that you're hurting, or people may hurt you even worse, she said. She was asked if she was a trusting person, and she said no, she wasn't, but it depends on the person. She said it was hard to find friends having that frame of mind. She was also asked if she was aware that even now, as she was being questioned, she was smiling. And Diane said no, that it wasn't supposed to be there, and then she laughed. Jagger asked her why she was laughing, and she blamed her father. She said that you had to sit or stand and listen. Don't smile, don't cry. You end up mirroring what's on his face, and you learn not to have a face at all. She said that she did realize that this was really serious, but she said that there were two emotions that were very similar, and she had not been allowed to cry, so she laughed. But she knew that this was serious, and then again she laughed. She spoke of her earlier life, her bullying father and her mom who dared not defy him. She said that she didn't tell her mom about the incest or fondling that had occurred starting when she was 12 years old. She didn't tell anyone until she was 16. She said because of her dad, she can't stand to be touched by dominating men. She said that she had always felt like she was controlled by someone. First her father, then her husband Steve. It wasn't until after her divorce that she told herself she would never be controlled again. And she said during the incest incidents, she would blank out, like it wasn't happening, like it wasn't real. She did say that she never cried or fought back. Diane was asked what kind of parent she was, and she said that the first year she was still trying to learn, and the next few years she considered herself a bad parent. She said that she and Steve were fighting a lot, and she was taking it out on the girls and yelling at them a lot. Diane admitted that she didn't remember everything about the night of the shooting or about going to the hospital, but she did remember that there was no one to help her. She remembered filling out insurance forms, but couldn't really recall telling Judy Peterson that the gunman had shot through the window. Diane played down her relationship with Lou. She admitted that she loved him deeply, but said that it was ridiculous for anyone to think that she loved him more than she loved her own kids. She said that Lou was a lot of work and a lot of trouble, and she said that she had left Arizona for Oregon to get away from her old life, not to force Lou into making a decision. She insisted that all she ever wanted was her kids. But although her words sounded right, it was said that conflicting expressions were shown on her face. Diane spent 4.5 days on the witness stand. She explained her entire life. She corrected, modified, set straight, and smoothed over things for the jury. She was asked about owning any guns, and she claimed that she brought 2 guns to Oregon with her, which were that .22 rifle and the .38 revolver. Diane said that Christy must have been mistaken about hearing music during the shooting because she did agree with Jim Peck that the tape player would not play if the keys were out of the ignition. Diane accused the police of not doing their jobs. She said at the hospital they had wasted so much time talking to her when they should have been out looking for the killer. She also blamed the hospital for paralyzing Danny. She said that when a nurse picked him up, she was the one who caused the paralysis. The time came for Diane to go over the night of May 19th in detail. She detailed the trip to Heather's and the drive under the dark trees to the mobile home. She said that they left Heather's at 10 till 10. She went back the way she had come, south along Sunderman. But she had turned away from town at the intersection with Marcola Road, thinking she would find the pass where Deerhorn Road went past a waterfall. But then she noticed that although Cheryl was still awake and talkative, Christy and Danny had fallen asleep. She said that she pulled over to the side of the road, debating where to go next, and that she and Cheryl sat there talking for a while about school and about the nosebleeds that Cheryl had been having, and also how Cheryl was planning to take the unicorn to school the next day. She said Cheryl then curled up on the floorboard and that Diane had pulled the seat back for her, and then Cheryl had covered herself with Diane's postal sweater. She was laying on her left side in the fetal position, and Diane started to look in her checkbook, saying that she had to buy lunch tickets for the kids for the following week. This testimony was the first time that Diane was mentioning some of the details she was now giving. They didn't seem very believable, that she would pull over on a dark country road to balance a checkbook. They were only like 15 or 20 minutes from home by this time. She said after she put the checkbook away, she got back on the road and went down Morcola towards Springfield. She turned off onto Old Mohawk Road. Then she saw a man in the middle of her lane, flagging her down with his left hand. She said her first thought was, oh, he's a lefty and he's in trouble. She said she stopped rather quickly. None of the kids woke up. She took the keys with her. She was asked how she felt about the police who didn't believe her, and she said she was angry. It made her disbelieve herself sometimes, and she felt like she was going crazy and she didn't know what was real and what wasn't real anymore. Jim asked Diane if she shot her kids, or caused anyone else to shoot her kids, and she said, no, I did not. Fred Hughey was ready for his cross-examination. He had thought about this moment 1,000 times. Hughey also began with questioning Diane's early life. He asked about her childhood, her relationships, her thoughts and feelings towards her children, her interest in surrogacy, and Lou. Diane didn't like Fred Hughey, and it showed. Whether to try to show Hughey up or just because she was who she was, Diane went on and on again. It was as if she forgot the jury was even there and what the purpose of her testifying on her own behalf meant. Hughey started a round of rapid-fire questions about the night of May 19th. She got very mad during the questioning. She was upset that Fred Hughey was insinuating that she did not try to save her children. She still claimed that she didn't realize, until she had reached the stoplight, that there was a towel wrapped around her wound. She said she had done everything, including taking care of herself, to take care of her kids. Diane was in tears now, but because of rage and frustration, not because she was sad. In closing arguments, Jim Jagger went on for 8 hours, ending with a statement about returning a verdict of not guilty, and not to base it on emotions, not base it upon feelings. He asked the jury to go back and think about the facts, because emotions could be misleading. Although on paper, when reading the transcripts, Jagger rambled. But in person, Jagger's arguments worked. In Fred Hughey's closing arguments, he started off stressing the importance of this not being just a divorce case. This was not about the feelings between Diane and Steve. This was about 3 children, only 2 of them still with us, and both of them were left permanently disabled. It was now, in closing arguments, that Hughey picked up the towel that Diane had wrapped around her arm. As the jury watched, Hughey folded the towel in half, end to end, making a smaller rectangle. Next, he folded this rectangle opposite corner to form a triangle. The blood spots matched up. He showed the jury that the darkest stain was in the first layer that touched Diane's arm, and each layer up had less. He commented on what a nice, neat pattern for someone to wrap themselves with, and that this is why Diane had lost no blood in the car. How extraordinary that she would grab frantically for something to wrap around her arm and come up with a perfect triangular bandage. Hughey suggested that Diane had prepared that towel bandage beforehand, that she laid her arm in her lap atop the towel, shot herself, and then wrapped the ends neatly around her injured arm and tucked them in. Even as her children gasped for air, she had taken great care to protect herself. At the end of his closing, Fred Hughie was full of rage. He addressed Diane directly, telling her, "Look, lady, for once, you're not going to lie your way out of this situation. It just doesn't cut it. You're a murderer, a cold-blooded, cruel, vicious murderer." The closing arguments ended on June 14th, 1984. Deliberations began, and most people stayed at the courthouse expecting a short deliberation. Minutes turned into hours, and then hours turned into a day, then 2, then 3. On the third day, at 4:45 p.m., the jury asked the judge for a legal definition of reasonable doubt. There was still no verdict, and still no baby. Diane was still very much pregnant. Midnight Saturday, the jurors still had not retired for the night. It had been 36 hours. But then, at 12:20 a.m., a light came on in the courthouse. The verdict was in. Everyone rushed to the courthouse, and even somewhere around 100 citizens had managed to find out that the verdict was in, and they were lined up waiting for the doors to open. Everyone was now in the courtroom, awaiting the verdict. The judge entered, and he warned that there should be no demonstration of any kind when the verdict was announced. The judge foreman stood and announced that they had reached a verdict. It seemed as if everyone was holding their breath. And then, Judge Foote read the verdict aloud. Guilty of attempted murder in the first degree. Guilty of a second count of attempted murder in the first degree. Guilty of first degree assault. Guilty of a second count of first degree assault. And guilty of murder.
Moment of truth came early Sunday morning at 12:45. A jury of 9 women and 3 men found Downs guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder and 2 counts of assault the night before.
For a moment, no one moved. Then a young reporter broke and ran for the door. He would be the first to the phones to report the story. Diane was white as paper, and she trembled, but she did not break down, not in front of the crowd of people. The judge ordered a pre-sentence investigation and remanded Diane for sentencing. Reporters then raced to the basement, where Diane had to pass through on her way back to the jail. Diane was observed pulling herself up and arranging a smile on her face before she walked out into the sea of cameras. Her personal escort through all of this, Chris Rosage, was crying, but Diane managed to keep that smile. Diane smiled until the doors of the jail wagon closed behind her. Only then did she cry. 10 days later, on June 27th, Doug Welch and Chris Rosage drove Diane to the hospital, where she gave birth to an 8-pound, 5-ounce baby girl that she named Amy Elizabeth Downs. Chris was in the delivery room with her. Within a few hours after giving birth, Diane was back in her jail cell. On August 28th, Diane appeared before Judge Foote again, this time for sentencing. Under Oregon law, a murder conviction brings a life sentence, but there is no mandatory minimum unless the convicted is declared a dangerous offender. The psychiatrist that examined Diane said that Diane's personality disorders qualified her as a dangerous offender. Foote stressed to Diane that if she ever made money for writing a book about herself, much of it would go to pay fines to be levied by the court for the cost of the investigation and trial. Foote also decreed that the sentences would run consecutively. For murder, she got life plus 5 years minimum, because she had used a firearm. For attempted murder, counts 2 and 4, she got 30 years with a 15-year minimum. the mandatory 5-year firearm charge would run concurrently. For assault in the first degree, counts 3 and 5, she got 20 years with a 10-year minimum with the 5-year firearm concurrent sentence. So basically, she was sentenced to life plus 50 years with a 25-year mandatory minimum. Judge Foote told Dianne that it was the intention for the court that the defendant will never be free again. On Friday, August 31st, Dianne was transported from the county jail to the nearby women's prison in Salem. In September of 1985, all legal connections between Danny and Christy and their natural mother were severed. They spent 3 years healing in the Slavens' home. And in the summer of 1986, Fred Hughey and his wife Joanne adopted Danny and Christy. On July 11th, 1987, Dianne cleared the fence at the Oregon Women's Correctional Facility in Salem, Oregon. She went out on the rec yard at 8:30 a.m., and she was on the outside of the fence by 8:40 a.m. It didn't take long for the prison to notice that she was gone. She was spotted by an employee in the parking lot as the nurse was arriving for her shift. And the nurse let the guards inside the prison know, and an official count was done. They were short 1 prisoner compared to the count from earlier that morning. The prison was only an hour-and-a-half trip by car away from Fred Hughey, and therefore Christy and Danny. And he was called that morning and warned that Dianne had escaped, as were Lou and Nora Lewiston. Those were the 2 most likely places that they could imagine Dianne to go, to see her children or her ex-lover. An intense search was underway for Dianne, but she was not found on that first night. Officers continued to search tirelessly for Dianne, with no luck. She could have been anywhere by now. Her cell at the prison was searched repeatedly, until finally it was noticed that on her notebook there was an impression from the page that had been written on before it. It was sent off to be processed, and it looked to be like some sort of map, leading to an address not far from the prison. The address was 2262 State Street Southeast. Police gained a search warrant for the address, as they needed to know why Dianne might have a map leading her to this address. The house was occupied by a Robert Stevens, and he is the one who answered and gave verbal consent to search the house when the police got there. The search soon revealed that Stevens was not alone in the home. Jim Sinclair was at the landing of the stairs, and he was asked if there was anyone else in the house. There was a bedroom door behind him that had not yet been searched. Jim hesitated for a moment, but then he did say that there were 2 other people in the house, and one of them was Diane Downs. Dianne was there with her prison friend Louise Cypress's husband, Wayne Cipher. Dianne was swiftly returned to the prison and charged with escape. She pled not guilty, but was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 5 years. Fred Hughey fought to get Dianne transferred to a prison further away from his home and new family. He won the battle, and Dianne was transferred to Clinton Correctional Institution for Women in New Jersey. Dianne is currently incarcerated at the Valley State Prison for Women in Chowchilla, California. She was denied parole in December 2010 and not eligible for another hearing until 2020. Well, guys, that is all I have for the case of Diane Downs. I really hope you enjoyed these past 2 episodes. Don't forget, we're on Patreon now, and for as low as $1 a month, you can unlock cool features. Just go to patreon.com/fatalpodcast. And as for our contest to win Fatal Swag, I'm going to keep it open another week. Just remember to call and leave a voicemail or text at 812-227-5227. Be sure to leave your name with your message and tell me the scariest thing that's ever happened to you. For questions or anything else, you can email me at fatalpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on our Facebook page. Thank you again for listening. I'm Beth, and I'll see you next week.